I I traced all of that throughout the Bible. Every person that God spoke to. Because in my background, God spoke to important people, a handful of people throughout history. In reality, God speaks to almost every character in the Bible: pagan, slave, free, king, pauper, prince. He talks in a myriad of ways. 80% of prophecy is first person, the voice of God. I could never prophesy first person. I would hear God speak something, because as an evangelical, this is how you do it. You're like, I had this impression, maybe test it. I'm not sure, but possibly God might be trying to say blah, 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 blah. By the time you get it out, it's so watered down that it's nothing. And that's people that are listening to the Spirit of God because we're afraid. In the Bible, it's not the way it is. When a prophet speaks, they're the mouthpiece of God. Most of the time it is first person. It's like the person is not there. And it changed me. And so it is one of the foundational components of my journey with the Lord. When I was going through this, it was 4 years of my life. Nothing every day but studying, God talking. And it was like I felt like my relationship with God this month was greater than it was last month. And that was month by month by month. And because I was like tuning in to that voice, to that whisper. And almost I've got so many miraculous stories. The reality behind most of them is God going, say this. No way. That sounds crazy. Richard, just do it. Okay, here I go. And I say, or I do what the Lord tells me to do, and something miraculous happens. And then I can explain it to someone like I know what I'm talking about. And it's all, the more dialed in we are to his voice, the more God shows up and does what only he can do. And he makes us look good when we don't have the answers, when we are completely dependent upon him, when we are dialed into his voice and doing what he says. And
that's amazing, Richard. I love that Bible too.
One of these is waiting for you when you get here.
Make sure you sign that for me. I was gonna, on that topic. I don't get often a chance to share this, but because life moves on, but back in the day, I wasn't I wasn't going out much in those early years, but when I did, a lot of people would show up because I wasn't out as much. And so we were in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the place where Daryl Evans recorded a record called Let the River Flow. And it was an old Walmart. And and a friend of mine, my father-in-law, was a big figure in all of the band back in that time period. And a friend of mine, we were here in Wisconsin at Lake Michigan, which, if you've ever been to Lake Michigan, it's a big lake, and so a tornado's coming towards us. And my father-in-law says to all of us, including Marissa, the violinist, jump into the water and swim deep into the water and you'll be safe in this dream. And then my buddy Matt, that was playing drums with me at the time, he wakes up from that dream and he calls me to tell me about it. So that later on that week, this is probably like a Monday or Tuesday, we fly and meet up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we're going to do a ministry night of worship. And there's a record I put out called Remember. And on that record, the first song is a song called We Are One in the Spirit. And it's an old charismatic Catholic song from written in Madison, Wisconsin during the Catholic Charismatic Renewal that my father-in-law used to always sing, which I didn't even put that together. But we get there and the pastor says, there's a massive tornado that's just ripped through Oklahoma City. And there is nothing between here and Oklahoma City that's going to stop it. It's coming our way. And we've got 1,000 people in the audience. We need to get them to some sort of shelter. And I said, well, there's so many people that have come from like Texas and driven like 11 hours to be here. Can I get a song? And he said, you have time to sneak maybe one song in. So I literally get up, and that whole record starts with let's sneak a little worship in, sneak a little song in, oh God. And I only said that because the pastor said you had enough time to sneak a song in. So I say that, and then I start singing, we are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord.
We are one in the Lord.
And in the middle of it, I remember the dream. And the Holy Spirit says, and it was like there was this moment of transition where I had to decide, are you going to sing out the dream? And are you going to speak? And then, so I start singing out the dream. That's what first starts happening. And try to separate, tornado, gotta separate, all try to swirling around. And the band is going with, this is all spontaneous, right? Like nobody knows what's happening, what I'm seeing, and I'm going for it. And then, try to separate, try to break apart, but tornado, and I start speaking to this tornado. And then we get to this huge crescendo. The water's too deep to separate. So in the midst of all this, it's like sing out the dream. Then it transitions to now in my spirit, speak to the tornado. So I start speaking to the tornado. You hear me in that song, swirling around, around, and around, and around. And I'm speaking, it's too deep to separate, isn't it, tornado? It's too deep. And I'm speaking this to this tornado. And in the back of my mind, while I'm saying this, I'm thinking to myself, Richard, this is going to be like the ultimate charismatic moment where I'm going to, in all great metaphor, I'm going to speak to this tornado and tell it all these things. And then we're all going to have to run for cover from the real tornado that's coming, right? Well, the pastor walks up to the stage and he says, it's unbelievable, but as you all were worshiping, I'm watching the weather people, and they're saying, people in Tulsa must be praying because this tornado, for some reason, has just broken apart.
Come on.
And we put that on the record, but literally, we never got the worship night back after that. After that, everything was a dud. It was like I couldn't get it back because there was so much in that moment, and I was so dumbfounded. And then I had some real growing to do, because how hilarious is it that the entire time in the back of my head, while I'm prophesying and speaking to this tornado, I'm actually thinking, this is going to be ridiculous. You know what I mean? And I'm having this process in my mind, but yet God is doing that miraculous act. And so I put that on the beginning of the Remember record, just as a memory for me, and just as something to remember. And I think I'm glad it's on there, because I feel like it's a consistent reminder to me that God doesn't always ask for my permission to act, right?
Yep.
So.
Yep. I don't know which album it was, but I remember I was like big into the next album, and then I got one, and I was like, this is I just don't get this. Like, this is kind of weird, and I'm driving down the road one day, and one of the songs on it was da 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 da, and I was like, I don't understand this. And all of a sudden, I'm driving down the road, and it hits me.
Yeah.
It's a baby learning to say daddy.
Yeah.
And I had to pull off the side of the road, and I lost it. And I was like, no, I get it. And that happens with some of your stuff. At first, you can't listen to it ooh, ooh, catchy, man, I just caught that tune and I'm singing along. Because it's deeper than that.
And how crazy would it be? Like, I got to meet Eugene Peterson a few times, as I got older, before he passed away. And I was reading his book on prayer when I wrote that. How crazy is that? Like, he would probably think it was almost heresy at first listen if he didn't know me, right?
Yeah.
But 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 hear me out. His book on prayer was his book on prayer is that the Psalms are not developed language. The Psalms are first language. And I'm reading that while I'm raising children, and we're in a small enough house where I can hear my children trying to learn how to say my name while they laid in their crib at night. Ah, da, da, ah. And I'm saying, that's first language. Lord, give me back to my first language. What happens then? I'm put in Louisiana by Healing Place Church with a bunch of kids that are orphans. And I try to sing all the great Father Heart songs from Vineyard and all this stuff, trying to make a connection for them. Nothing connects. And then one night I was singing the song Come Up Here from the Faith record, and which I originally recorded in Nepal. We were in a Maoist strike, and I was stuck in a hotel room with a guitar, and I sat out and read Revelation chapter 4 and looked over this landscape and sang and wrote Come Up Here. And I get to that part, I want to fly, and all of a sudden we go for 2.5 hours. And in the midst of that, and all these kids that couldn't connect to a traditional worship song or chorus, they were engaged. No one left the space for 2 or 3 hours.
Wow.
All in spontaneous. You're not even singing an actual song that anybody knows, and even that I know. We're just singing out. And in the middle of that, I go back to hearing my child. And I realize now what the Lord was doing is that's exactly where these kids were. It was like, I don't have developed language from my relationship with God, but I want to become like a newborn baby just trying to say your name. That's where we are. And and that's the power that is, yeah, it is weird. Yeah, it is kind of strange. But I think I'll always keep it, you know?
Yeah. When my spirit got it, I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to this over and over again. Like, but it was like my brain wasn't wrapping around it. You know, it wasn't like a catchy tune, but it was like, I was like, wow, this is so profound. And I love it. And I appreciate. It's interesting too, because one of the things that's even happening for me today is your stories behind the songs.
Yeah.
Make them so much more powerful. And that's what I've been doing, this this song a cappella. Sometimes, not perfectly on key, whatever. It's never had accompaniment, but it wrecks a place. But you separate it from the story, and it still has power. Like, we've now recorded. I got a phenomenal pianist play the background. Fixed, some of the stuff, sang it over and over again until we got it right. And it's still not perfect, but it was like, yeah, this is good. But you separate it from the story, and it can live, but it's not the same. You connect it to the story, and it's way more profound, way more powerful.
Yeah.
It's more impactful.
Yeah. And that's not just with my music or anybody's music. It's actually with almost all art. I've even been learning that. I've been Abraham Joshua.
Keith Goodson.
Yeah.
Keith Goodson got to paint for you. He's a buddy of mine.
Oh yeah.
And he's going to be painting at the Champions.
Oh, I love that guy.
Yeah.
Love that guy.
Yeah. And what we're talking about is art. I love it when I allow him to prophesy when he paints.
Yeah.
Because I want to know what were you seeing? What were you hearing when you painted that? So go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted you, but.
Well, yeah, years ago I read this when I was in seminary, that Abraham Heschel used to always say that he was kind of pitting his philosophy against Freud, and he was saying, satisfaction isn't all that life is about. Life is also about something much deeper than satisfaction, and that's appreciation. And so like with all philosophy, you always want to like just kind of existentially sort of process it, right? And I started realizing that, I never was a Beatles guy. I never really got into it. And so I'd listen to it and it was like, people would be like, I mean, you ever heard the Beatles? And I was like, well, I mean, some of their music, I kind of like it, But what I started noticing with almost all music, especially now that we have this like period of time where we have documentary, right? And you can watch a documentary. The more meaning, so like you go watch a documentary of, Paul McCartney talking about his songs with the Beatles or something, right? And you're listening to it, and the more I appreciate it, right? The more I understand the background of it, the more it satisfies. Now, for some people, the music will satisfy them prior to that. But for a lot of us, when it comes to all music, I lean in more to people as I age, because I'll say, if I can get to know you a little bit more, I might understand a little bit more about your art. I might be able to appreciate it a little bit better. And most of us that are real artists, and we've got a lot of pop art and a lot of like, we write for people to consume it. But I'm not that. I've never really been that kind of artist. I've never written for that purpose. When I sit down and write, I don't write like, I really hope people get Power and Poverty. I just recently, I'll just give you one example of this. So I wrote this song. There's a Power and Poverty that breaks principles. I'm watching Mother Teresa give a speech, and she basically says, of all the things that I've ever done, this is in the mid 1990s. She's giving a speech around Christmas time, and she says, of all the things that we've done at our charity, what I'm the most proud of is that we've adopted and raised to adulthood 3,000 children. How could anyone believe that a child is not a child while yet in the mother's womb? When Jesus' presence ministered to John the Baptist while both of them were still in their mother's wombs. And she speaks this out in front of all of these world leaders, right? And she says, I have one thing to say. If you don't want your children, don't abort them. Send them to me. We'll raise them. And she says this. Well, certain leaders didn't stand up, but most of the room rose to their feet and began to clap, and certain people, were extremely offended. But I'm watching this woman who's like all 4'9" and full of wrinkles and, all of it, with so much power. And then it's about the time of Jesus. And I start singing, and it just starts coming out of me. There's a power. It's so fast that I have to write it down. There's a power in poverty that breaks principalities and brings authorities down to their knees. And there's a brewing frustration and ageless temptation to fight for control by manipulation. But the God of the kingdoms and God of the nations and God of creation sent this revelation through the homeless and penniless Jesus the Son. The poor will inherit the kingdom to come. And where will we turn when our world falls apart and all of the treasures we've stored in our barns can't buy the kingdom of God? And who will we praise when we've praised all our lives? Men who build kingdoms and men who build fame, but heaven does not know their names. And what will we fear when all that remains is God on the throne with a child in his arms and love in his eyes and the sound of his heart cry? And so
one of my favorites.
When I was younger, though, if you remember, I was such a part of a community there at Regent where there wasn't like this agitation to things that were not at first glance or first listen understandable. But I remember the first time I quoted that, man, I got lambasted. Number one, that I was talking about Mother Teresa, and people just berating me that she's sending people to hell, and she's this and that. I mean, all this religious nonsense, of which I didn't really respond to. But if I had a response, I would have been like, well, give me a good evangelical that's doing what she's doing, and I'll talk about that person, you know. But at the same time, I kind of shelved that song, that poem for a while, Richard.
Mm.
And a few weeks ago, I'm in Palm Springs, and there's this amazing moment at that same time, the song you're talking about, that you da da and all this stuff. There's this song called Fly, where this young little boy came up to me and said he saw an angel singing behind me. And that story's probably gotten out there. It's not like I run around and I'm like, hey, here's my good buddy Gabriel. You know what I mean? It's not quite that. It doesn't work quite like that.
Yeah.
You make a brand out of singing with angels or something. But there was
You haven't made an album with him yet, huh?
Yeah, I haven't done one yet with Gabriel. He's pretty difficult to get, But the point is that, do I believe that angels exist? Of course I do. Do I believe that But the point is that here I am, and I'm in Palm Springs a few weeks ago, and I give the first talk and then lead worship for all the sessions, and Compassion International is involved. And so they have, the president emeritus is a guy named Russell. Amazing man, and he's close to 80 now. He walks up to me with tears and he says, the entire time I led, he was pretty much the founder, grew up in Africa, grew up in tribal villages, real deal Christian, father and mother, real deal missionaries in these places of Africa. When he came to the United States, he hardly spoke English, and he becomes the leader of basically the formative days of Compassion International. He comes running up to me with tears coming down his face. As a man that's 80, for me, that's a very humbling experience. More humbling than any person that's loved my music saying, I like you. I mean, to have a man that's, close to 80, who's done all that he's done, run up to me with tears coming down his face saying, I so wanted to meet you. There's two songs that have been transformative for me. The one is Fly, of which I was like taken back by. He says that song Fly, it was formative for Compassion International, because I realized early on, and now we're seeing it, the issues that were the plight wasn't the poverty, it was the giving up. And so in these impoverished places of the world, the first thing I always wanted to do, and we're seeing this now in affluent places of the world, was just to get down on my hands and knees with these kids and move them from giving up to fly. And I realized that was a miraculous movement that had to happen for them. So many times I would just play that song Fly. And some of these children didn't even understand the language of it. Mm-hmm. But they would know that one word. And they would just move from this hopeless space into this space of a new perspective, a new vision of where I'm at. And he said in the second song, and then he starts reading it to me like I just did, reciting it. There's a power in poverty that breaks principalities. And he said to me, I used to always tell my children, today I'm going to take you to where the rich kids live. And I'd take them to these places and just let them figure it out. I'm going to take you away from the affluent society. I'm going to take you where the rich people live. And I'd take them to these places where they had nothing, but they were so rich in generosity, so rich in love. And he recites that poem to me. And it so spoke to me, because I was like, wow, and I don't know if you've ever had that happen to you, Richard, but why would I allow that sort of, flippant criticism hold me back from reciting what the Lord had given me. 25 years ago, I was reciting that. But what you start to realize is the people that have ears for it are the ones that hear it, and they take it and they run with it. And but I even for myself, I was like, well, I better not touch that anymore. That seems to really offend the upward and onward, get more wealth, and you'll have more happiness, the society that we live in, the gods. It had angered, like Abraham Heschel used to always say, the gods are angry. He also said the gods aren't angry, but that's the thing, that a lot of times words like that are so prophetic. They stir up the gods get angry. The idols of our culture get angry, and they say, how dare you say there's a power? I mean, I had somebody one time say, how dare you say there's a power in poverty? There's no power in poverty. All this stuff. And I thought, well, maybe I ought not quote that song anymore. Just let it go. But then to have this guy come to me and say, no, that's not how I heard it, Jason. Let me recite it to you. And it's like, oh, thank you, God. Which goes back to earlier, just recognizing sometimes, even for me, Richard, I don't know what's anointed or what's not anointed. How many times have you ever had somebody come up to you and say, so how did you think that night was? And I'll often say, I have no idea how it was. It kind of felt just like when I lead worship at home. Nobody's there. The crowd's not there. You can kind of guess, but as you get a little further along, you don't even know what God's up to. God's up to so much more than just what meets the eye, or what my ears can hear, or what I can understand in a moment. And I'm thankful to God for that.
Yeah. Well, I definitely have experienced the anointing of your music again. And I love the label that was on one of your albums. I don't remember which one, but it was the Keith Green of this generation. Because I got to go to intensive Christian training. That was their school.
Okay.
It was back in like 85. So Keith Green had passed away in 83. So like 2 years after he had passed away.
Yeah.
I'm in Lindale, Texas, going through their discipleship training school.
Yeah.
Because his music had made such an impact on my life. And some of the earliest songs of yours, I felt like I was hearing a reincarnation of Keith Green, and it was, but so many of your songs, they don't fit the mainstream genre of what's happening, but it is the voice of God, it's the heart of God, and it. It's like Jesus. So often, one of the things I've been pondering lately, because I've had pressure move into social media, taken some forays into that, and had people critiquing and giving feedback, and I took pause, because I'm like, I don't want to be like this. I don't want to be like this. I want to be like Jesus. So I started asking the question, Jesus, he's the most viral person of all time. How did he respond to this? How did he become this? He's still the most viral man presently. You take any top viral people, and there's more people using his name than anybody else's name. Some of them are using it in vain,
right?
But it's being used in vain. It's being used every Sunday in massive. And I'm like, how did he approach worldwide fame?
Yeah.
And it was like he was the antithesis of understanding the trends and playing to the market, playing to the masses.
Yep.
And yet he's here, he's talking, he's present, but without seeing him, without any press releases, he is talking louder and more than anybody in any arena. And they're trying to drive the narrative. Their algorithms, AI is trying to drive the algorithms, and they can't silence the most trending voice of all.